Greetings. So I'm back with another video, and I have some interesting questions in this video. As you know, the other day in class, one of the goddesses in my class asked me a very, very interesting question. And so I thought, I'm going to actually put a video out on this question. Her question was, what questions should we ask our pastors, reverends, or ministers to qualify them as being our pastor, reverend, or minister? And I found that to be a very good question, because a lot of pastors sometimes like to use the excuse that I was ordained by God, to say that I have the ability or the skill or the qualities necessary to disseminate the spiritual teachings of the Bible. However, in any other subject matter, be it math, science, English, or whatever, usually you would have had to have had some training in that subject in order to be able to disseminate that subject or pass that information on to someone else. So I find it very interesting that most people who sit under religious leaders either do not question them at all as to their knowledge, their factual knowledge concerning the scriptures, or they don't really know the questions to ask to be able to qualify the pastor or the minister or reverend. And so I'm going to give you all a series of questions that if I was to follow the religion of Christianity, what I would actually ask a pastor, to be able to qualify him as my spiritual leader. So the first question I would ask is, do you have a degree in theology? And the reason why I would stress that is because, again, usually with any other subject matter, you have to have some training in that subject in order to be able to teach people about it. So if a pastor was to tell me, no, I've never been to theology school, then that would tell me that you really don't have the history as it has been compiled, in the educational world. Because, again, like I said in my last video, don't look at it as a religious belief. Look at it as a form of education, because that is exactly what it is. Spiritual education, mathematical education, linguistic education, they're all different forms of education. And therefore, in order for a person to be able to teach you something, they have to know it as it stands on a factual basis. Meaning, a lot of times people who've never been to theology school create a philosophy out of the religion. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they'll take this verse and then relate it to something that the congregation may or may not be able to relate to be able to draw the point, instead of actually teaching it from the format of the actual subject matter as it relates to its origin. For example, my question also would be, is Genesis the original name of the first chapter of the Bible? And the reason why I would ask that is because according to history, the Bible, the original Torah, was written in Aramaic Hebrew, and Genesis is a Greek word. So my question is, if Genesis is a Greek word and the original Bible or Torah was written in Hebrew, then what is the Hebrew word that Genesis replaced? And so you come to the Hebrew word barashith, and barashith comes from a root word in Hebrew called bara, and bara means reconstruction. Genesis is a Greek word that comes from the word gineos, and it means in the beginning. So you see what happens? If in the beginning is what Genesis means, and reconstruction is what the original chapter barashith meant, then does in the beginning corroborate with reconstruction? No, they don't. One gives us the interpretation that it's the first time it's been done, and the other one gives us the interpretation that it's not the first time that it's been done. So therefore, we can understand why in the Bible, when Cain kills his brother Abel, and they was going to cast him out of the Garden of Eden, eastward of the land of Nod, and he was afraid of something. What was he afraid of? He was afraid of anyone finding him while he was eastward of the land of Nod would kill him. Now, at this point of the Bible, they only gave us 4 characters, 3 males, 1 female. Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, right? So Cain kills Abel, he eliminates one of the people on the planet. So that leaves Adam, Eve, and Cain. When the Almighty came to Cain and told him that what he did would cause him to get cast out of the Garden of Eden as a vagabond eastward of the land of Nod, he was afraid that someone finding him would kill him. If these are the first 4 and only people on the planet, and he already eliminated one of the people, then who would find him and kill him in a place that was not located wherever he was? So that tells you that Genesis being a reconstruction was not the first time that this has been done. All right, so another question that I would ask the pastor is, can you read, write, and speak fluent Hebrew and Greek? And the reason why I would ask that is because going back to the example of the word Genesis and Bereshith, the ancient Aramaic Hebrew language and the ancient Greek language, a lot of times the context, the syntax, and the grammar do not directly corroborate with English. And so if you have no knowledge whatsoever on how to draw the conclusion factually based on what the words meant from that language and the language that we speak, then what's going to happen is you're going to end up giving people a misinterpretation of the scriptures. And so people will walk around thinking one thing, but really they should be somewhere else when it comes to understanding this particular verse or in this chapter, or that particular verse in that chapter. So if they don't read, write, and speak fluent Aramaic, Hebrew, or Greek, or have a very great overstanding of it, then they don't qualify to be able to teach you a verse that they can't translate it factually. Another question I would ask is, prior to Christianity being given to the slaves in America, was the ancient African people following Christianity as a religion? The reason why I would ask that is because if through slavery these teachings was actually disseminated to us, and we know that the slave master didn't give us nothing good, then why are you so loyal to a religion that basically was implemented during the time of oppression, right? So it's almost like you're loyal to the same thing that actually conditioned you to be less than yourself. And you can't find traces of Christianity inside of Africa. Most African religions were animism or nature worship. It was not dealing with Jesus. Furthermore, Jesus is a Greek word, so African people didn't speak Greek. And so that would be a very good question. Another question I would ask my pastor is, are you a Freemason? And the reason why is a lot of pastors are Freemasons. And in Freemasonry, when you get to the 30th degree, the Royal Arts degree, there is you get introduced to the actual God of Freemasonry. And you have to make a choice on whether or not you're going to choose the inferior God of Freemasonry or the inferior God of Christianity. And in Freemasonry, you learn that God is Lucifer. But Lucifer is not who we've been made to think he is. These are mythological beings that has been placed in an anthropomorphic form, meaning they take inanimate objects and give it a human form. Or if I say anthropopathism, right, they take inanimate object and give it human feelings. And so Lucifer, Lu means primitive and cipher means circle, and the primitive cipher is the sun. And so a lot of it goes back to sun worship, Re, which is sometimes false pronounced as Ra. And so you can't trust a person that has a God, in secrecy, and then profess to believe in the God publicly that you truly don't believe in, because Jesus even said you can't worship two masters. So that would be a good question to ask your pastor. Another question is, if Eve was created from Adam's rib, shouldn't we be missing a rib? Because if you took a rib from him, unless he actually was able to grow that rib back, then shouldn't we be missing a rib? And if we're not missing a rib, then explain that logically. How you could take a rib from one being to create another being and we're not missing a rib. So that would be a good question. Again, another question dealing with the rib or Adam and Eve. If Adam was the first being created and Eve came from Adam's rib, we know that a rib is what? Bone. What is on the inside of a bone? bone marrow. What does bone marrow do? Bone marrow produces what's called erythrocytes. Erythro in Greek means red and cyte means cell. So it produces red blood cells, and red blood cells reproduces the DNA. So if Adam is the only human on the planet and then a female is created from his rib, then explain the different blood types, because there should only be one blood type. Blood don't mutate like that. Blood types are based on the absence or presence of protein makers. So there shouldn't be different blood types. And even further, humans have Carl Langston viewed human blood before, like back in the day, and he found that humans have what's called Rh factor blood. And Rh factor blood, Rh stands for rhesus, which is the rhesus monkey. So the question would be, how did humans get the blood type of a monkey, right? So you can't breed with a monkey to actually have children. And furthermore, again, blood types don't mix, as far as not mix, mutate. So that's a good question. I also think a good question is, was the Bible originally written in parables that were not translated literally? And the reason why I would stress that is, if the pastor can tell you that this verse is a parable, but he lacks the ability to delve inside of the scriptures and translate that parable into a logical, realistic message, then what they have you believing in is myth. Right? And so if you can't tell me what this parable represents, I have no other choice but to take it on face value, literally. But how can you take a parable literally when you know it's a metaphor? So it would test whether or not this particular individual that's actually explaining this information to you actually has the knowledge to be able to translate the scriptures. Another question I would ask is, are there different types of gods being mentioned in the Bible, but actually we're interpreting it as if it's the one God? And the reason why I say that is, you have a word in Hebrew in the Bible called Elohim. And Elohim is the word Elo, which means the source. It's actually where the word Allah actually comes from. El means the or God, and Lo means source. And then you add the Hebrew letter Yad, Mim, that's a Y and an M to make it plural. So Yim puts a S on it in Hebrew. So Elohim means gods, as in plural, and it's a uniplural, meaning it you don't need an S like the word deer. It's one deer or five deer. You don't say five deers. So it's one Elohim or five Elohim. You don't say five Elohims, right? So with the word Elohim, it literally translates as more than one God or these beings. And you can go inside of Psalms 82 verse 6, where it says, I've said ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Also, the word Elohim is what's being translated when Jesus says, isn't it not written in your law that ye say we are gods? So the word Elohim sometimes is translated with a small g. And I stressed this one time before in my class. There are no capital or lowercase letters in the ancient languages. That's only an English translation for their lack of understanding of a polytheistic religion that was converted to be monotheistic. I'm going to explain that. Okay, so in the Hebrew doctrine, we know that there was various different ways of describing different gods. But when monotheism came about, they sought to actually unite all of those gods as one God. But for the English-speaking person, they couldn't actually translate that in the same way. So that's why sometimes you might say a big G or a little g. However, it doesn't matter whether you spell God with a big G or a little g. It does not lose its definition of the word. All they're trying to do is account for the fact that there are many different gods in the ancient way of life or religion. And in monotheism, you can't preach and teach that and still remain monotheistic. So the word Elohim, again, actually means more than one God or these beings. El means the, or God. Then you have Elo, which means the source, right? And all three of these words are being translated inside of the Bible just as God. But what people don't understand is if the Jews was in Egypt for all of those years in slavery, then what was their religion? Because we know that our slave masters don't allow us to practice our original culture. So if that's the case, then what happens is your culture, your language, and your religion usually in slavery gets stripped from you and it's replaced with something else. For example, just like Moses. If Moses was raised in Egypt, right, by the Pharaoh's daughter, then what religion was Moses following? Because they're not going to allow you to empower yourself in that day and time, especially under a totally different religion than the Pharaohs. Same thing with Jesus. It says Jesus spent the first 13 years of his life in Egypt. Then what was he learning? Because when he came back in the temple to receive his bar mitzvah, he got into an argument with the learned rabbis. What would a 13-year-old boy have to argue with the learned rabbis about? A difference in doctrine. Being as though Jesus spent so many years in Egypt, the only people back then that was teaching that they were men and gods were the pharaohs. Ferti is how you say it in the ancient Egyptian, which means pharaoh, right? And so the rabbis was telling them, hold up, that's not standard Judaic teachings. You can't teach that. Jesus was basically saying that I am a man and I am a God. And they was using the word Elohim to be able to translate that. In the Egyptian, they use Neteru. And in the ancient Sumerian, they use Anunnaki, right? Nowadays, we don't use the term gods. We call it angels. Or in the Arabic, we say Malaika. All right, so that'd be a good question. I also would ask, was there actual physical war in heaven as Revelations 12 verse 7, 8, and 9 state? If so, if people are rebelling and being killed in heaven, should we actually be in a rush to get there? Because how is there that on earth there could be wars and we're asking for protection from an almighty God that cannot even stop wars in his own domain? In Revelations 12, 7, 8, 9, basically said that the angel Michael fought hard against the dragon, or Satan, and the devil fought hard against the angel Michael and prevailed not. Neither was their place wanted in heaven. That devil, the dragon, that serpent, who was thrown out of heaven down to earth by God. So he not only has wars going on in heaven, he can't even protect us from the devil. He actually throws him down here for us to deal with a problem that he could have resolved that problem within inside of his own domain. That's something really to think about. Okay, so another question would be, where are the missing books to the Bible and are they relevant? Because if there was originally more books inside of the Bible, which that's what Bible means, it comes from the Greek word biblos, which means many books, then isn't that the same thing as saying that there are missing information? And if there's missing information, how do we know that what we have now is the complete story? And why are we basing our life on an incomplete story? So that would be a good question. Another good question would be, do angels personify as men? Because when you go in Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, it says, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were agreeable and took them all of which they chose. And it's basically conveying the message that giants or Jabarians actually bred with mortal women, right? And so they would have had to have a physical body in order to do so on the physical plane. And if this is the case, then do angels personify as physical beings? According to this, we know it does. And if angels do personify as physical beings, what race would they be? Is it all races? Is it just specific races? Because you got to think about it. If you tell me that an angel can actually come to the planet Earth and take on a physical form, then you won't be able to tell the difference between an angelic being and a physical human being. And so therefore you would have to accept the fact that angels also can become physical human beings. That's a very good question. Another good question is, when the Bible was being compiled by the Nicene Council, if it was a divine book by God, why did they have to actually argue on what to keep and what not to keep? Meaning, if the book was complete when it came from God, then what made them actually set a new standard for us to be able to follow? Because actually, that would say that they played God and edited the book in a way that would give us the fundamental beliefs that they saw in their day and time, and even up to now, that we should actually take hold of. And I find that to be more mortal than divine. So that would be a good question. Another good question would be, if God knows everything, why did he have to ask Adam and Eve, who told them they were naked? All-knowing God wouldn't have to ask a question, right? And if you say, oh, he was just testing them to see what they would do or say, if you're omniscient, you would have already known what they were going to do and say. So to ask a question that you already know the answer to is called being obnoxious, right? So the God that says, who told you was naked, that's not an all-knowing God. It can't be. Another thing is, I would ask my pastor is, can God be everywhere at all times and still be in transit? And literally what you're saying is, can God be everywhere at all times and still be moving? The reason why this is a good question is because if you say that God is everywhere at all times, but then I read in the Bible that God came down from heaven to earth, where's he going that he's not already at if he's everywhere at all times? And to go even further with the thought, in order to travel from one place to another place, you can't be where you were when you get to where you're going. And when you get to where you're going, you're definitely not where you were. You understand? And to even go further with the logic, you would have to travel within a space that's smaller than yourself. For example, if I'm traveling in this room, right, I can't be bigger than the room. I have to be smaller than the space that I'm actually traveling in. So I find that to be a very interesting question. I want to, get some comments to see, for those that actually ask, see what the answers you get. Another good question would be, is heaven a planet? And is God an extraterrestrial? The reason why I would ask that is, every time you see the word sky in English or heaven inside of the New Testament, the actual Greek word, if you go to your Bible concordance, is a Greek word pronounced oranos. Oranos, right? Ouranos. Oranos. And Oranos in English translates to be Orion, which is the 6-star constellation in the 16th galaxy. Why is heaven being translated as an actual planet? If you go to Job 38, 31, 32, and 33, then you'll find that they speak about different star constellations, Pleiades, Arcturus, Mazorith, and Orion, and they call these the firmaments or the heavens. So if Oranos or Orion is heaven, then we know that that's a star constellation. Wouldn't that also make God an extraterrestrial? Otherwise, why are you saying that the place where God resides is an actual planet? So that's a good question. So I'm gonna end it with that because I don't want to, give too much. I already know that I'm probably gonna get a lot of negative, take that down, and you shouldn't be questioning God. And again, I'm going to tell y'all this. I don't question God. I question what man attempts to teach me about God. I find the people who try to educate us on religion are very uneducated people. I'm not religiously indoctrinated. I'm religiously educated. There is a difference. And belief without proof is ignorance. And ignorance means to ignore the fact. You accept things without question when we should question everything. And so I find it to be sad actually that people are actually giving their souls to something that they really have not researched. They really have no basis of fact, and you can't substantiate it. Like the Bible is not substantiated by time nor situation. And so that results in us having fundamental misconceptions of reality all over again, back to that. And so what I would like to do is just keep raising the awareness of people, like making you question things. Don't believe me, go check it out. All I want you to do is just ask the questions. Go look it up. Everything I'm saying could be proven. Go look it up. Whether it's definitions of words, pronunciation of words, the Greek, the Hebrew, the Arabic. I speak Arabic fluently. I speak Hebrew fluently. So when I disseminate these teachings to you, I'm not telling you what somebody told me. I'm telling you from a research perspective, so that you would be able to understand, first of all, that this information that we're actually being given has no basis in fact. It has absolutely no basis in fact. And a fact, by the way, is some form of information that can be proven by evidence, experience, and reasoning. Why? Because we experience evidence and we use it to reason. So experience, evidence, or reasoning are the three tests to be able to prove a fact to be a fact. And if they can't give us a rational spirituality, I feel like that it needs to be denied and rejected.